Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Arthur stepped through the front door, the latch clicking softly behind him. The late hour pressed in, a familiar weariness clinging to him after his business trip. Yet, beneath the exhaustion, a quiet relief hummed the comforting weight of home. Vivian, his wife, whom he'd affectionately called Viv since their college days, greeted him with a smile that seemed to bloom in the dim hallway light. Something about her struck him as different tonight, an almost luminous quality, an eager anticipation that went beyond his homecoming. He couldn't quite place it, but he dismissed it as the trick of tired eyes and the endless parade of airport terminals. "Arthur, honey, I have some news," Vivian said, her smile now tinged with a delicate shyness. Her eyes held a sparkle, but beneath it, a flicker of something else danced, an undercurrent that didn't quite align with her bright expression. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, the word hanging in the air, a fragile thing. For a beat, Arthur froze. The announcement echoed within him, resonating in a way he hadn't anticipated. He quickly masked his surprise, offering a reassuring nod before pulling her into a gentle embrace. "Act happy, Arthur. This is good news," he told himself, even as a strange disquiet stirred within him. "That's wonderful, Viv," he murmured, his voice a little too soft. She took a deep breath, her hand squeezing his a fraction tighter. "We're having twins, Arthur. Twins." The word landed like a stone in his gut, amplifying the unease he was desperately trying to ignore. He forced a smile, nodding as Vivian's excitement bubbled over. A torrent of doctor's appointments, due dates, and future plans that felt strangely distant, almost surreal. He knew he should be elated, that this was a moment for celebration, but all he could muster was a hollow acceptance, a pale imitation of her enthusiasm. Before he could fully process the news, Vivian had already moved on, her energy infectious. "Oh, we absolutely have to have one of those big gender reveal parties, with games and fun contests. Wouldn't that be just perfect?" Her eyes shone, and she practically bounced on the balls of her feet. "Sure," he replied, doing his best to sound engaged, the exhaustion clinging to him. "Whatever you want, Viv," Arthur said, his tone light, but his mind felt miles away. Their young son, Leo, perked up at the mention of a party. "A party?" he asked, his small face lighting up with pure, unadulterated joy at the thought of games and treats. Arthur managed a smile, ruffling Leo's hair, but the knot of unease in his stomach refused to loosen. He looked at his son, seeing him through a subtly altered lens, a new and unsettling perspective. He spent time with Leo, listening to his excited chatter about the party ideas Vivian had mentioned, but even as he nodded and made encouraging noises, his thoughts kept drifting, lost in a murky tangle of suspicion and a dread he'd been trying to suppress for months. Vivian's news had only confirmed his deepest fears. He knew too much already. The secrets he had begun to uncover had subtly shifted the very ground beneath their family, cracking the foundation of trust he had once taken for granted. And now, with the unexpected announcement of twins hanging in the air, he knew he could no longer bury the truth. Their family stood at a precipice, and he felt like the only one who could see the chasm yawning before them. A few days later, Arthur found himself back at the airport, the familiar hum of departure announcements washing over him as he prepared for yet another business trip. His life had fallen into a predictable rhythm of work and travel flights, anonymous hotel rooms, unfamiliar cities waking under hazy skies. For years, he hadn't given a second thought to what unfolded back home. He had trusted Vivian implicitly. Their marriage, he believed, built on a bedrock of honesty and love. But now, as he settled into his seat on the plane, a heavy weight pressed against his chest, a feeling that had been subtly creeping in for months, a quiet yet relentless unease that refused to dissipate. Arthur had never been the type of man to question Vivian's loyalty. He loved her. She was the mother of his son. But lately, too many small discrepancies, insignificant details he had once brushed aside, now resurfaced with insistent regularity, tugging at the edges of his peace. He flipped open his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keys before finally clicking on a specific folder. It wasn't work-related, no spreadsheets, no project files. No, this was something else entirely, something he had kept hidden, locked away even from the forefront of his own mind, like a recurring bad dream he desperately tried to forget. With a sigh, Arthur began scrolling, his eyes scanning the familiar screen, absorbing the silent, damning images playing out before him. There was no satisfaction in it, only a hollow, sickening sadness that settled deeper with each passing moment. The videos didn't ease his suspicions. Instead, they fueled a growing unease, stirring an anger he had fought so hard to suppress, pretending it wasn't there, a festering wound beneath a carefully constructed facade. He exhaled sharply, closing his eyes and leaning back against his seat, trying to shake the overwhelming sense of betrayal that seemed to seep into his very bones. His mind wandered, and suddenly, an image of Mark, his neighbor, came into sharp focus. Mark, with his easygoing smile and ready laugh. Mark, who had helped him clear the yard last summer without a second thought. Mark, always quick with a joke, a friendly pat on the back, a warm, open demeanor. Could someone truly be that good, that generous, that seemingly genuine, without concealing something beneath the surface? The thought left a bitter taste in Arthur's mouth, and he couldn't shake it. People can be chameleons, he reminded himself. They wear masks, especially the ones you trust the most. And that was what unsettled him most, the gnawing possibility that he had been utterly, completely fooled. It all circled back to one thing, one final, inescapable truth that gripped his mind. Even as the plane soared through the clouds, high above a world he suddenly felt utterly disconnected from. He knew what was coming next. Vivian had been eagerly planning the grand gender reveal party, a celebration she promised would be unforgettable. Friends, family, it would be a day to remember, she had said, her voice brimming with excitement. But as Arthur stared out at the gray expanse beyond his window, he knew that for him, the party wouldn't be about balloons or colored confetti. No, for him, it would be the moment everything irrevocably changed. Arthur felt a desperate urge to end it, to tear down the fragile illusion they had been living within, to step out of the suffocating lie he felt trapped in. But he couldn't, not yet. There was too much at stake. If he acted impulsively, he risked losing more than just his peace of mind. He needed time. Time to get his affairs in order, to gather the necessary pieces. Time to prepare for the inevitable fallout. For the first time, Arthur found himself questioning everything he had once taken for granted about his family. Even his sweet little boy, Leo. Leo was only 6, his heart and eyes still so pure, so full of innocent trust. The last thing Arthur wanted was for him to be caught in the crossfire of a storm he never asked for. So Arthur resolved to bide his time, to hold on to his suspicions with quiet determination, and to carefully carve a path toward a future where he could walk away from the life he once cherished with his head held high and his assets intact. The weeks that followed stretched on. Each day a strange blend of simmering resentment, forced patience, and quiet, meticulous preparation. Vivian was completely absorbed by the pregnancy, planning every detail of the twins' impending arrival with an enthusiasm that, in a different reality, might have been infectious. She chattered endlessly about cribs and tiny outfits, about the elaborate decorations for the gender reveal party, utterly oblivious to the profound shift that had occurred within Arthur. She didn't notice the subtle change in his gaze, how his once open and loving expression had become calculating, almost cold. She didn't see him staying up late with his laptop, not for work, but to meticulously gather the evidence he would need for the road ahead, the life he would soon forge on his own terms. Arthur played the role of the devoted husband with practiced ease, maintaining appearances while carefully laying the groundwork for his departure. He met with his lawyer in secret, made strategic adjustments to his finances, and quietly arranged a new living situation, something simple and unassuming, far removed from the elaborate illusion he had been trapped within. He even dedicated time to researching matters concerning Leo, a process that often kept him awake at night, a gnawing worry in the pit of his stomach. As the months slipped by, Arthur became a master of restraint. He smiled on cue, laughed at the appropriate moments, offered words of encouragement. But beneath the surface, his resolve only hardened, his determination becoming an unyielding force. Then, finally, the day arrived. The day of the grand reveal. Their backyard had been transformed into a festive spectacle. Colorful tablecloths adorned the tables, vibrant flower arrangements added splashes of color, and cheerful banners fluttered in the gentle breeze as the air filled with the happy sounds of laughter and conversation. Vivian, positively glowing with radiant joy, moved through the crowd, her beaming smile soaking in the attention. Friends and family gathered around the laden food tables, excitedly exchanging guesses about whether the new arrivals would be boys or girls. Arthur moved through the throng of well-wishers in silence, his thoughts a world away from the idle chatter around him. He wore his best suit, a dark, sharply tailored ensemble he hadn't worn in years, its crisp lines mirroring the intense focus in his gaze. Then his eyes landed on Mark. Their neighbor stood near the refreshments, laughing easily as he chatted with another guest. Arthur's stare lingered for a moment, and briefly, Mark caught his gaze and offered a friendly, open smile. Arthur chose not to return it. Today, the pretense would end. He stood tall, observing the scene before him with a hawk-like intensity, feeling the weight of months of secrecy and silent resolve pressing down on him. The moment he had been meticulously planning for was finally here, the step that would sever him from the tangled mess his life had become. Vivian, practically vibrating with excitement, took her place on the small, makeshift platform they had set up in the backyard. She clapped her hands together, a bright, attention-grabbing sound that cut through the murmur of conversation. Her smile was wide, radiant, full of anticipation. "Thank you all so much for coming to celebrate this incredibly special day with us," she began, her gaze sweeping over the gathered friends, family, and neighbors. "Family means absolutely everything to us, and with our 2 little ones on the way, we are beyond thrilled to embark on this new chapter together. So, we thought a little fun contest would make today even more memorable." The crowd erupted in applause, their enthusiasm buzzing in the warm afternoon air. At the center of the platform, a large black balloon bobbed gently, filled with the confetti that would reveal the baby's genders, the moment everyone had been eagerly awaiting. Vivian turned to Arthur, her eyes shining with expectation. He took a slow, steady breath, the weight of the past months pressing down on him like the ominous calm before a storm. But he maintained his composure, his expression carefully neutral. "Before we get to the big reveal," Arthur said, raising a hand to gently quiet the expectant crowd, "I'd like to give my wife a small gift." Vivian's smile faltered for a fleeting moment, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. But she quickly recovered, likely assuming this was another sweet, romantic gesture. One more touch of magic to add to the perfection of the day. Arthur handed her a beautifully wrapped box, the ribbon tied with meticulous care, the wrapping paper bright and cheerful, an ironic contrast to the heavy, unyielding look in his eyes. The crowd hushed, a palpable sense of curiosity filling the air as Vivian carefully untied the ribbon and peeled back the colorful paper. She lifted the lid, her smile slowly dissolving as she took in the contents. 2 neatly stacked piles of paper. The first, thick and official-looking, bore the unmistakable stamped words, "Divorce Papers." The second, thinner but no less devastating, was clearly labeled, "DNA Test Results." Arthur's and Leo's names were printed in bold. The color drained from Vivian's face. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the documents from the box, her mind struggling to comprehend the stark reality staring back at her. Murmurs rippled through the guests, confusion spreading like wildfire. Conversations abruptly ceased. Every eye locked on Arthur, waiting for an explanation that hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet undeniably present. Arthur turned to the stunned crowd, his voice cutting through the silence like a shard of ice. "I shouldn't be the one standing here today," he said, his tone flat and unwavering. "These future twins, this big reveal, it's not for me." He lifted his hand and pointed towards the back of the crowd. "It's for Mark." Every head swiveled, Mark, his glass of lemonade frozen halfway to his lips, stood awkwardly near the refreshment table, his face a mask of utter shock and disbelief. "He should be up here," Arthur continued, his voice steady. "He should be the one popping this balloon." A collective gasp swept through the guests. Vivian's head shook frantically, her face flushed with a mix of anger and desperation. "No, Arthur, no," she sputtered, her voice climbing towards hysteria. "This is insane. What kind of sick joke is this? Leo is your son, and these babies, they're yours too." But as she spoke, her voice faltered, the certainty in her words crumbling beneath the weight of her own guilt, written plainly across her face. Arthur remained unmoved. "I don't know who Leo's father is, Vivian. Maybe it's Mark," he said, his tone unwavering. "But what I do know for certain is that Mark is the father of these twins." Silence fell over the yard, thick and absolute. The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap, leaving the guests in stunned disbelief. All eyes turned to Mark, who stood motionless, his face ashen, his mouth slightly open in shock. Beside him, his wife's expression shifted from disbelief to devastation, her pain giving way to a simmering fury. Arthur exhaled, then gave the crowd a small, almost casual wave, as though this were just another party, just another goodbye. "For those of you who want more details," he said, his voice calm but resolute, "you're welcome to join me at divorce court." A ripple of whispers surged through the guests. "But as for me," he continued, his gaze briefly touching Leo's confused face, "it's time to go, time to move on to a new life, one without lies, without betrayal." Vivian's composure finally shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she let out a desperate, panicked cry. "No, this is all a lie. Arthur, you can't believe this. I am your wife. I am faithful. This is just a sick misunderstanding." She stumbled forward, clutching the papers in trembling hands, pleading, "Arthur, please." But he had already turned his back on her, walking steadily towards the gate. Before he could leave the yard, Mark moved to intercept him, his face contorted with anger. "Arthur, come on, we need to talk. You can't just walk away," Mark hissed, reaching out to grab his arm. Arthur didn't break stride. With a swift, almost effortless motion, he sidestepped Mark and hooked his foot around his ankle, sending him sprawling to the ground with a surprised grunt. Looking down at him, Arthur's voice was low but resolute. "You're not my neighbor, Mark. You're not my friend. You're the same kind of traitor as Vivian, and I have nothing more to say to you." Without another word, Arthur stepped over the fallen man and continued towards his car. The crowd instinctively parted as he moved through them, their eyes following him in stunned silence. He slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool beneath his touch, his fingers gripping the steering wheel. Taking one last look at the faces frozen in shock, at the wreckage of the life he was leaving behind, he started the engine. Then, without hesitation, he pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind the gasps, the whispers, and the shattered remains of his past. No one knew where he was going. All Arthur knew was that, for the first time in a long time, he was driving towards a future that truly belonged to him. In the months that followed, Arthur navigated the divorce proceedings with a steely calm that surprised even himself. His preparation had been meticulous, his every step calculated. He had seen this coming, a dark cloud on the horizon, and had quietly braced for the storm. Long before Vivian had any inkling of his knowledge, he had ensured his assets were secure, tucked away in accounts and investments beyond her reach, protected by legal structures with no loopholes, no oversights. When he walked into that courtroom, he knew he held all the cards. And then came the evidence. In addition to the damning divorce papers and the irrefutable DNA results, Arthur submitted hours of surveillance footage, recordings from hidden cameras he had discreetly installed throughout their home. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as the recordings played, the images on the screen clear and undeniable. There was Vivian, wrapped in Mark's arms, whispering intimately, laughing softly, disappearing with him into rooms that should have been their sanctuary, meant only for Arthur. The judge's expression hardened as the truth unfolded. Vivian sat at her table, squirming in her seat, her face flushed with shame, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Then came the final, devastating blow. The DNA test unequivocally confirmed what Arthur had already suspected. Mark wasn't just the father of the twins. He was also the biological father of Leo, the little boy Arthur had spent the last 6 years raising as his own, pouring his love and energy into shaping his young life. The revelation was earth-shattering, exposing a 6-year affair that had consumed nearly half of Arthur and Vivian's marriage. The timeline was irrefutable, a stark testament to years of calculated deception. Mark soon found himself facing his own legal battles. His wife, upon discovering the extent of his betrayal, wasted no time in filing for divorce, armed with the comprehensive evidence Arthur had provided, not out of malice, but out of a sense of weary finality. She walked away with the lion's share of their shared assets, including a generous alimony settlement, leaving Mark, the man who had once shared casual beers and friendly banter with Arthur over the backyard fence, facing financial ruin, burdened by the responsibility of 3 children he could barely afford to support. Vivian and Mark were left with nothing but each other, a fragile foundation built on lies, a mountain of debt, and the daunting task of raising 3 children in an atmosphere devoid of trust and stability. For Arthur, the outcome was precisely what he had meticulously planned for. He walked away from the trial with his financial security intact and his dignity, though bruised, unbroken. He had refused to be a victim of their deception any longer. Everyone in that courtroom had seen through Vivian's desperate attempts to portray herself as wronged, her flimsy efforts to shift the blame crumbling under the weight of undeniable truth. In the end, she was left to face the consequences with the man she had chosen, a choice made out of impulse or selfish intent all those years ago. Now, looking back, when the dust had finally settled, when the courtroom battles were over and the full extent of the betrayals had been laid bare for the world to see, I made the hardest decision of my life. I walked away not just from Vivian, not just from Mark, but from Leo too. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. For years, I had been his father in every way that truly mattered, tucking him into bed each night, teaching him to ride his first bike, holding his hand when he was scared. And for years I had believed he was mine, a part of me. But the truth, stark and undeniable, was that he wasn't my son, not by blood, not by any fundamental connection I had once cherished. And while a part of me yearned to fight for some form of custody, to maintain some semblance of a role in his young life, I knew with a heavy heart that it would ultimately cause more harm than good for both of us. I had to let go completely. He deserved a father who was truly his, a man who wouldn't forever look at him and see a painful, living reminder of what had been so cruelly taken away. I refused to let my own anger, my own profound heartbreak, become his burden. So I made the call. No custody battles, no shared parenting arrangements, no forced, awkward visits where we would both pretend things were okay when they never truly would be. It was better this way, a clean break for everyone involved, even if it tore a piece of my heart away in the process. I don't know where Vivian and Mark ended up, and honestly, I don't particularly care. The moment the ink dried on the final divorce decree, they became ghosts in the landscape of my past. They packed up their belongings, disappeared from town, and took their newly formed, fractured family with them. Perhaps they thought leaving would somehow make it easier to forget, to move on from the wreckage they had created. Maybe they believed that running would shield them from the judgment of the people they had once called friends. Good. Let them run. Let them spend their days looking over their shoulders, wondering if the consequences of their actions are still lurking just around the corner. As for me, I'm finally moving forward, slowly but surely. There's someone new in my life now. Her name is Sarah, and she's kind, funny, and most importantly, she's honest. She doesn't carry the weight of past betrayals, doesn't inadvertently remind me of everything I lost. Being with her feels easy, natural, in a way I hadn't realized I desperately needed. It's a quiet kind of happiness, a gentle dawn after a long, dark night. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time.